The 2023 presidential elections are over. The Independent National Electoral Commission has presented the certificate of return to the APC presidential candidate Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, making him the president-elect and the winner of the election. Now, this decision and this conclusion has not sat too well with many who feel that the process was marred with irregularities and controversies. However, some persons have been forgotten or have not been given an attention in this matter, and that is people with disabilities. Now, in the ruckus and in the fracas that has ensued, persons have forgotten about how persons with disabilities were treated, if there was inclusion, if there was participation, and if they were given a fair playing ground to cast their vote and exercise their voting franchise. This and many more we'll be discussing tonight on Top Talk, where we'll be taking a deeper look into how persons with disabilities were treated. Tonight, my guest is the founder of the Albino Foundation, Mr. Jake Epelle. He sheds more light on this matter. All right, Mr. Jake Epelle, welcome to Top Talk.
Thank you.
All right, I'm aware, correct me if I'm wrong, that you deployed about 700 observers for this election. Please give us a general overview of what you witnessed, especially as regards, or let's start on the general note before we go into specifics.
Well, generally, I had high hopes, very high hopes, and based on high promises. Unfortunately, I was a bit disappointed because, for me, my understanding and my perception was that we were going to have the best of election. This was going to be the best election ever. Unfortunately, if you want to quantify it by the phrase best election, it fell short grossly. So that's my disposition. I had expected a better outcome than we got, than the nation got, INEC, despite all the preparation, didn't live up to expectations, in terms of execution of already plans that we were aware, in terms of logistics, in terms of the technology. I think the technology was the beginning of what looks like near failure, So for me, I was a bit disappointed because I trusted everything that we were told, hoped that those things would work, and for heaven's sake, is human, so there's bound to be human error. But it is inhuman when those human errors are not communicated. You begin to feel whether it was deliberate, the lack of communication. If you ask me to sum up where INEC missed it in terms of logistics. Their logistic was faulty, and that's why you saw that they were not able to deploy on time. The election didn't start when it's supposed to have started. They missed it in terms of communication, being able to come out and say, this is what is happening to us, this is where we are, knowing fully well that not only this nation, depending on the entire international community, everybody. And I think INEC got an overwhelming support, overwhelming support, institutional support, moral support, and unfortunately they didn't live up to expectations.
All right, can we go a bit into specifics?
Mhm.
You know, what were those things? Where did they fall short? You know, for those who might not be aware.
I have enumerated it before. Their logistic was faulty. You know, they didn't. They were not able to deploy and got to the polling unit on time. Uh, Statistics shows that about 37% or 40% of deployment. You know, I think 37% shows that they got there at 8:30. Okay, but look at, it's a far cry from at least making a pass mark, you know. So that was one major issue. There was a lot of crisis and violence. Some of them were propelled by INEC staff who didn't do what they ought to do, you know. And of course, the issue of inclusivity fell short more than any election that they have tried to drive inclusivity. We thought, the community of persons with disability, we thought that this will be one election that we will say that it was truly inclusive. But it ended up being very exclusive, you know, at the detriment of the community.
All right, but before we go more into what happened, I know throughout the periods you said that INEC had a lot of support. We actually saw you a number of times having dialogues, discussions. You know, what were the things, you know, discussed and agreed upon that didn't come to fruition? Were there assurances given during those engagements constantly between the persons with disability community and INEC?
Yeah, you know, that's what actually, you know, was a source of worry post this election, because we had unfettered access to INEC chairman. I mean, that's why I was defending him even at the last minute. You know, he gave us access. You know, we discussed issues. He told us what he could do and what he couldn't do. You know, gave us all the assurances. So I personally believed him, you know. And like I've always told him, privately and sometimes publicly, I said there's always a disconnect between what you're saying and promising with what happens in the field. And my conclusion, and anybody can fault me on this, my conclusion is that it's either he's indulging in self-sabotage or he is being sabotaged, you know, either internally or externally, you know, or being remote controlled by those in power. And he's not able to tell us. But I still insist, Mahmoud is a fine gentleman, you know, very brilliant. I respect him for his intelligence, you know. And like a friend said, well, his intelligence has worked against us, you know. That's history will tell. Incidentally, he's a professor of history, you know. It's very discouraging, to be honest with you. And, you know, discouraging in the sense that this is a friend. I didn't like him. I loved him, you know, and he also has shown that love and concern for me and for what I do, you know. So you can imagine when somebody you have invested so much in emotionally, and he fell short, well, or maybe his action or his intention fell short. It's very disheartening. Sincerely, I've not been able to sleep well when I think of the beautiful ideas, the opportunities that he gave, the access he gave us, you understand, and the promises, you know. And I have not changed my mind that he wasn't going to do those things, you know. So maybe he needs to address what happened. And probably tell us what happened. You know, he's a very brilliant gentleman, you know, and I also stand to be corrected that I don't think he's the type of person that does not feel the pulse of people and critics. Hopefully, in this forthcoming governorship election, he will redeem himself.
All right, so that's fair. I can actually sense and feel your pain at the issues raised here. But, you know, just for clarity, for those who might not be aware, what were those things that didn't go the way it was supposed to go in terms of inclusion? What were the materials that were supposed to be deployed, the timing and all that, according to your observers? You
know, this is where I most times really sympathize with him, you know. In fairness to him, he didn't have a budget for inclusion. You know, I mean, the specific things that he was going to get. But I think in his miscellaneous budget or something, he was able to pull out funds, you know. There were 3 specific things which he promised he was going to acquire, you know. In the off-cycle election, he acquired those things. Magnifying glasses, you know. I saw him bend backward, look for money, and acquired it, you know. Braille ballot papers and guide and jacket, printed posters, you know. Emphasis on processes like priority voting, you know, providing sign language in specific places. These things, I believe, were acquired because another best practice that he employed prior to this election was he carried us along, you know. I know that he insisted that we must sign off on those products, those who use it. And I was one of those who signed on magnifying glasses, signed off on magnifying glasses. So, and they took us, they were transparent in the process of engagement. They took us through even to the number that they were going to procure, you know, and we agreed and signed off. And, you know, I don't know whether those things were eventually procured. I'm not in their system, you know. But if they were procured, they were not in the field in a good number that will make us say, yes, they provided these materials. Because not only our observers saw the skeletal, they gave us feedback, skeletal deployment, you know. Then friends who have seen me on TV, who are aware of our advocacy, called me and said, look, these things you said INEC was going to provide, they didn't provide it. There was a bunch of persons with albinism in Lagos State that called back to say, look, they never saw those things. They asked for the magnifying glasses, it was not available. Now, I think what happened was that there was a surge in people showing up at the polling unit and polling station. Now, automatically, even me, where there is a huge number of crowd, I tend to go away because I don't want them to, sort of, push me around in the crowd, you understand? Yeah. So there is a likelihood that that may have resulted into the level of voter apathy that we saw around the community of persons with disability.
Well, that's sad to hear. But moving forward, what are the, you said something about communication. I'd like to ask, at this point, has there been any, perhaps even privately, we saw you at the Collation Center when you took the mic and expressed some displeasure. And the INEC chairman, while responding to some complaints, said that he would respond the next day. And for some reason, I don't think anyone has gotten that
I don't
response.
think there was that response, not to
Yes.
my knowledge, not to my knowledge.
But has he reached out in any way?
No. He doesn't need to. I mean, he's saddled with a lot of issues. It's not mandatory that he has to reach out to us, but reach out to the nation. Reach out to the nation. You know, I think where they missed it, and I would emphasize this and say it over and over again, was when they were having challenges, quote and unquote, with the IREF, you know, the result portal. I remember my interview on one of the television stations, early morning, no, a bit late in the night. You know, this whole thing by 4 p.m. people became jittery.
Yeah.
You know, I think by 6 or thereabout, I was on one of the channels. You know, and I said to them that, and the anchor asked me, "What should INEC do now?" I said, "Come out and address the nation, address the issue. Forget about what people will say, but put out something, address the issue." And said, look, we're having problem. Either you're having problem with your server, or you're having problem with your transmission, you know, and all that. It will be reassuring. And what will happen is that people like us today would have been defending it and say, look, I mean, he's not the owner of the technological space. You know, something could have gone wrong, but he came out and communicated. There's no doubt there's also the flip side of it is that people would have taken him on that, you understand? But he would have been exonerated. That after all, I told the nation the problem that I was having and that I was making effort to fix it, you understand? It never happened. Maybe like almost 30-something hours later, they now issued a statement signed by Barrister Festus, you know, saying that they are having glitches and all that, you know. Too little, too late. You know, that's the essence of effective communication. It's time-bound. If it's not released at the proper time, you change the perception of people, you know. So, and truly, this was one of the things we kept drumming into the ears of INEC. You need to be more effective with your communication strategy. You need to be more effective. A proactive communication, you know. Before anybody will blame you, you would have said, this is where I am. This is what my challenges are, you know. And then there'll be people who will rise up and help defend you, you know. That's where we are.
All right. Let's talk about what this could do to the psyche of persons with disabilities and generally. We've been doing a lot of advocacy and trying to encourage people come out, and they say some persons are very down and dejected. I trusted, and I'm never participating again. Do you think this would happen in large droves, or is this something that people might still have some level of hope?
I'm dealing with that myself. I'm dealing with the stress of all the hard work. We invested millions in this process, in our technology, in our deployment, in our procurement. We invested millions. And ours is a far cry from bigger organizations that I know. I know an organization that deployed 3,800 observers, and their operational staff was more than 2,000 plus. So think of and how they will feel. I didn't feel the impact of all that happened at the time within the space, the collation, the result. Maybe because I was still effective, you understand? But by the time I got home yesterday, it wasn't good.
Right, but I do hope we can still pass that message that people should.
Well, people should take heart. Take heart. I just said to myself, life must continue. We can't give up. You know, as a leader, you don't throw in the towel. You know, and so today we had an elaborate management meeting planning for next week, and so next week we'll still deploy. We're looking at the statistics, and we might go up to 200 and something by next week.
You mean in terms of observers?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then our hub will still be open at the Hilton.
All right. That's great. That's good to hear. So speaking about the legitimacy, while you stood up to speak at the National Coalition Center, you did try to calm down those voices, just so the process could go on. And there were suggestions that if you have issues, speaking to the parties, meet in court. Do you think the manner in which this process has been held brings an issue of legitimacy to the results, especially even with international observers also giving some damning reports?
Let me focus on what I did. What I did was not to legitimize the outcome, but rather to allow peace to reign as we go through the process. I want to make that very clear. It was not an endorsement of the product, but it was to allow peace to reign and go through the process, you know. And I think, and I have no regret getting involved and intervening at that time. And I want to believe that that intervention brought some calmness, even in the room and in the nation, because I had more of people who praised the effort than I had those who criticized it, you know. So that's it. It was just to protect the process. And protecting that process at that time was protecting the law. Because by law, the political party have no right to stop the process. They have no legal authority. I'm not a lawyer, but let any lawyer fault me, because incidentally, I was sitting behind the president of NBA. And I turned around and asked him, I said, look, Mr. President, I don't want to be wrong or fall foul of the law. Do they have a right to stop this process? He said no. You know? And don't forget, as an NBA president, you know, for him to be in that hall is actually an endorsement of the process, you know. So that's why I did what I did, and I think it brought some level of calmness and sanity in the environment. But I didn't do that to legitimize the outcome.
All right. Let's talk about some comments from some other persons within the disability community. The Inclusive Friends Association Executive Director Grace Jerry observed that there was increased participation, political participation of persons with disabilities. She noted that there were sightings of people with disabilities as polling unit agents. In that respect, did the parties do any better in terms of incorporating persons with disabilities?
Well, you know, Inclusive Friends had a different parameter for observation, and we had a different parameter for observation. We were working guided by the data science, you know, and I'm sure they also have their own parameter for the observation. Yes, there is evidence that there were some parties who took persons with disability as agents. There was also noticeable evidence that INEC took persons with disability as ad hoc staff or supervising officers, you know. But the question is, did they really work, taking into consideration the quagmire, the chaos, you know? And of course, with the kind of violence and the confusion, around the polling unit during the day, I can tell you that those guys will run for their life, you know. So I think if I interrogate our system and our feedback and the report, which of some of them we had to consider this morning in our management meeting, there could be some iota of increase. But then in terms of execution, I don't think any of those people had the chance to properly execute inclusion, which is what they were expected to do.
All right, let's round up with this now. I know I've asked you before, but just a recap. So that was another place anyway. For recommendations now, it's about 8 days or about thereabouts till the state elections. Now things are even somehow more decentralized, and we're going to see, much more whether there's apathy or not. So that being said, what are your recommendations on both areas, both for persons with disabilities and generally speaking?
Well, persons with disabilities should still come out and participate and vote and be voted for. In terms of INEC, INEC needs to rejig its her logistic plan and execution, Secondly, they need to ensure that they are the polling unit on time with the resources. If there are any place where the resources were not deployed, they need to deploy it and deploy it on time. They need to be a little bit more transparent, and this time, let the IREV work. Let it work. If they do that, I'm sure it won't take the length of time that we have to go through to get the presidential result announced. So they need to do that. They need to also interrogate some of the complaints by the political parties, even though their outcome may not have any reasonable impact on the overall outcome in terms of the president-elect, but it will serve as a learning curve for future elections, I think they also need to caution their staff to do the needful and not play a partisan role. And finally, I think 40% of all INEC headache are traceable to the Rex. I don't think that many of them handled well what they should do, and that brings us to the issue we flagged, we flagged even before the election, and that's the issue of some of the regs being partisan, or one or two of them are APC card-carrying members. So what do you expect, And I can guarantee you that most of those regs that we flagged and cautioned that they shouldn't be confirmed, very many of their state were trouble spots, because they wanted to deliver on the mandate of the person who sent them there, And I think finally, INEC needs to avoid political pressure, external pressure from politicians. You cannot tell me that it didn't play out in this election. So they need to avoid those political pressure and stay truly independent.
All right. Just in a matter of seconds, what about the electorate? What can they do to bring a level of
Let's not lose confidence. Let's not throw the baby and the bath water. You know, let's go back to the pool. You know, let's participate, because if you don't and you leave it to them, they will hijack it. You know, so let everyone participate. This time, actually, they should come out in larger number and vote the candidate of their choice, period.
All right, thank you so much for coming, sir. It was great to hear from you. Thank you.